Hi, I am so glad that you're joining me live today. My name is Leah Courtney, and I am a homeschooling mom and business owner at As We Walk Along the Road. On Monday, I started this Facebook Live series all about unit studies and how you can create your own literature-based unit studies. On Monday, I talked about the value of unit studies and how we had really come to enjoy using great literature through literature unit studies in our homeschooling after we decided to ditch traditional textbooks and workbooks. So today I want to start going through the 5 steps that you can use to develop your own unit studies. Today I'm going to talk about the first 2 of those steps, and then on Friday there will be another live talking about the last 3 of those steps. And I will remind you at the end as well, but if you want to get a written copy of these steps as well as a free unit study planner, you can go to resources.aswewalkalongtheroad.com/unit study planner, all one word, and you can get your own free ebook. It's got the 5 steps in it as well as printable unit study planning sheets that go along with these 5 steps. So today I want to talk about the first 2 steps when you are going to plan your own literature unit study. So a literature unit study, as we talked about on Monday, is a unit study that's based around a great kids book. And a unit study is when all of your learning is focused around one particular topic. So your unit is about that one topic. And so literature unit study, your main topic that the unit study is focused on is going to be the book that you're using. And then within that book, you're going to draw out some academic subject areas, history, science, language arts, and other areas that all revolve around the topic in that book that you're using. So the first step is to choose the topic. And this starts with choosing the book you want to use. So I've done this several different ways. Sometimes I use historical fiction because I want to go through different historical time periods. Sometimes I'll just pick a book that the kids really enjoy or that I really enjoy, and then we'll start from there. Sometimes I let the kids give me some suggestions for books that they enjoy and would like to study further. So I like to sit down and brainstorm a list of topics or books that we want to use. Now, once you've picked your book, you also are going to look at what topics to cover within that book, because most books have topics, different topics that you could draw out of them. Especially a chapter book is going to have a lot of different topics that you could choose to focus on, that you could pull out of that book. So you're going to brainstorm your list of books that you want to use, and then once you've picked your book, go ahead and look through the book. You can pre-read it before you share it with the kids, and think about the different topics that you could draw out of that book. What are some different things that you could study from that book? An example that I like to give is Charlotte's Web, because I have a literature unit study for sale on my shop about Charlotte's Web. And out of that book, there are a number of different topics that I chose to focus on in that unit study. I chose to focus in science on the topic of pigs and spiders and farms in general. For history, I chose to focus on the 1950s, which is the time period the book is set in. And I also looked at county fairs because there's a county fair that plays a big part in that book. So you're going to have your list of books ideas, some that you give, some that your kids give, and then once you've picked a book, then you're going to have your list of topics from that book that you can cover. So that's step 1, to brainstorm your topics, to choose your book, and then to choose different topics within that book to look at. The second step is to think about the different academic goals that you're going to have for each of your kids throughout this unit study. One of the great things about unit studies that I mentioned on Monday is that you can use them with your whole family. You can read the same book together, but your older kids might have these activities that are a little bit harder, while your younger kids might have other activities that are a little bit easier. And so the whole family can be studying the same material, but doing different things with it based on age and ability levels. So you want to think through the academic goals that you want to cover with each of your kids. And I like to do this by just creating a chart with the subjects across the top and the kids' names down the side, and then I'll go through and think through, okay, this child, this is what I want to cover in math, if there's any math related in the unit study. This is what I want to cover in science, if we're going to cover science topics in this unit study. And then I go through that with each child, and that helps me to think through what each age level needs to focus on. And again, if you pick up that free ebook and unit study planning pages, there are some planning pages here that will help you to do that, to be able to go through those different subject areas and think of different academic goals for each child. Now, one of the sort of complaints or doubts that I sometimes hear when I talk about unit studies, people will talk about, what if there are gaps? So I'm listing some of these academic goals for each child, but what if I'm leaving gaps? What if I'm not covering everything that they really would cover in school, or that they would cover with a more structured, traditional style curriculum? And here is my answer to that gap myth, because I do think that it is a myth as far as the fact that we don't need to worry about it, because I have been a regular teacher in a traditional school, and I have also used structured traditional curriculum in that school and with my own kids. And I know for a fact that there are gaps in kids' learning, even in traditional school. There are going to be gaps because kids don't all fit into the same path. And so you might be teaching through this traditional curriculum, but you're losing kids along the way. Or you have kids who have worked so quickly that they're just tuning out and not even paying attention to what the rest of the class is learning. So I would say that traditional curriculum really only hits the middle level of ability, sort of an average, if there is such a thing, average kid. Older kids or kids with more ability, or kids that are younger or less ability that have not developed as far along, those kids are all left out of your learning. So there can be gaps in that as well. With a unit study, you can kind of tailor it to the ability level of your kids. And so there will actually be less gap because the material is directed toward them, and they're going to be more actively learning than if they were in a classroom and either way ahead or way behind and just sort of left out of the whole picture. The other thing that I would say about this whole gaps thing, if you do use standardized tests, if you have to be using testing based on your area where you live and the requirements for homeschooling, sometimes you will see that students will score lower in certain areas because they haven't covered that material yet, whereas if they were in a traditional school, they would have. I don't see this as a problem because it doesn't necessarily mean you aren't ever covering that material. It just means that you're not walking along the same path as they're walking along in traditional schools. And that is okay, because your kids are learning the material and they will learn it. It just might be at different times. An example for us here in South Carolina, where I live, is that state history is studied in a particular grade. It used to be fourth grade. I'm not sure about now. In our homeschool, we didn't cover state history in 4th grade, but we did cover state history. For us, it was more of a middle school thing with my older kids. With my younger girls, it was actually before 4th grade. It was when they were younger than that, early elementary. We covered state history. So I wasn't necessarily in step with what the traditional curriculum was. And if my kids had taken standardized testing, and if they had had questions about that, then they probably would have scored lower than the average percentile on the standardized tests. But that's not because there's a problem. It's just because our schedule was different than the traditional schedule. So I don't see that as a problem, and I don't see that as having gaps. The only time I would tell you, yes, you might want to put a little bit more thought into this is if you know for sure that your kids are going to go back to a traditional school. If you're homeschooling only in the short term, then your kids probably do need to cover similar material to what they would be covering if they were in a traditional school. This doesn't mean that you can't use unit studies. It just means that you need to do a little bit of research to find out what material kids would be learning at different ages. Were they in a traditional school? Here in the United States, you can usually find that out by just searching for your city's name, your state's name, school districts. And within that, you'll be able to find links that show you your state requirements for different grade levels. You can use that information as you plan your unit studies, because then you can choose which topics you're going to cover based on what you know the kids will be covering in traditional school. So as you're thinking through the academic goals in this second step of creating your unit study, you can keep those things in mind. I wouldn't worry about anything related to gaps unless you know that you're putting your kids into a traditional school. And then I would say still use your unit studies, but just do a little bit of research to find out what they would be covering so that you can cover those similar things within your unit studies. So just to recap, because we went down a little tangent there, the first 2 steps of creating your own unit study. Step 1 is to brainstorm your topics. Start with lists of books that you want to cover. And then within those books, think about the topics that you're going to pull out. And then the second step is to go through each of your children and think through what academic goals you want to be meeting and covering with this unit study. Again, I'll remind you, if you want to see examples of this, and if you want a little bit more detail as well as some planning pages that will help you out, make sure you pick up my free ebook and unit study planner, resources.aswewalkalongtheroad.com/unit study planning, all one word. And I'll make sure that I put that link in this video description as well. Thank you for joining me on Friday. There will be another live where I wrap up the steps that you